There are images in the history of cinema that seem carved into eternity, moments so iconic that they transcend the very films that gave them life. One of those moments is Deborah Kerr lying on the wet sand as the waves crash over her, locked in a forbidden embrace with Burt Lancaster in From Here to Eternity. For millions, that scene became the definition of classic Hollywood romance: sensual, poetic, unforgettable. But behind that timeless image stood a woman whose life was a quiet storm of discipline, restraint, and unspoken longing. Deborah Kerr was elegance personified, the English Rose of Hollywood, the actress who never raised her voice, never courted scandal, and never allowed chaos to stain her reputation. Yet this very perfection became her greatest paradox. She was nominated for the Academy Award 6 times without ever winning, a record that turned her career into one of the industry's most bittersweet chapters. How could an actress so revered, so respected, so consistently brilliant remain forever just one step away from Hollywood's highest honor? Behind her serene smile lived a woman fighting against invisible walls. The limitations of typecasting, the expectations of studios, the burden of appearing endlessly composed. She longed for darker, more conflicted roles, for the chance to show the depth she carried within. But Hollywood, enamored with her refinement, chose to see only one side of her. From her early days as a disciplined ballet student in England to becoming the muse of director Michael Powell, from the dazzling rise in Hollywood to her quiet retreat in Marbella, Deborah Kerr's life was a journey defined not by noise, but by the power of stillness. And now, the truth behind that stillness is ready to be told. Before Deborah Kerr ever stepped in front of a movie camera, before her name appeared on marquees or her grace became synonymous with Hollywood elegance, she was simply a young girl in England whose world revolved around discipline, silence, and movement. Her first dream was not acting, it was ballet. From childhood, she trained with the single-minded rigor that only dancers understand. Long hours at the bar, endless repetitions, aching muscles, and the constant pursuit of perfection. Ballet taught her control of the body, of the breath, of emotion. What she didn't know then was that this quiet discipline would one day become her greatest cinematic weapon. But life, unpredictable and often ironic, had other plans. A minor injury nudged her away from dance, and an unexpected opportunity pulled her toward the stage. One day, an actress abruptly abandoned a role in a theater production, and the timid, soft-spoken Deborah, then barely noticed in the corridors, was asked to step in. No one expected brilliance. No one expected transformation. Yet when she walked onto that stage, something shifted. Her stillness commanded attention. Her presence filled the room. Without raising her voice, she made the audience listen. That night changed everything. Among those who took notice was director Michael Powell, one of the leading figures of British cinema. Powell saw something others didn't, a rare emotional depth beneath her quiet exterior. He cast her in several roles and eventually made her his muse, the performer he trusted to bring complexity to characters that required more than loud emotion. With him, Kerr shaped some of her earliest and most defining performances, culminating in the hauntingly beautiful Black Narcissus, 1947. In that film, she portrayed Sister Clodagh, a nun grappling with forbidden emotion and spiritual turmoil, an internal battle rendered with such precision and vulnerability that critics around the world took notice. Hollywood took notice too. Her performance in Black Narcissus caught the attention of American studios. Yet their fascination came with hesitation. Could this soft-spoken, refined British woman succeed in the loud, glamorous landscape of Hollywood? She didn't look like the typical American starlet. She did not flirt with scandal, did not explode with emotion, did not command attention with flamboyance. Instead, she possessed something far rarer, A calm intensity, a subtle magnetism that made every quiet gesture meaningful. When Deborah arrived in Hollywood, she did so without grand entrances or dramatic proclamations. She carried herself with the modesty of someone still adjusting to the idea of fame. Yet directors and producers could sense the gravity beneath her serenity. They admired her, but they were unsure where she fit. In a world that celebrated boldness, she embodied restraint. In an era of tempestuous leading ladies, she was composed. The contrast fascinated them and confused them. What they didn't realize was that her quietness was not a limitation, it was power. Hollywood tried to nudge her toward transformation, soften this, brighten that, lose a bit of the Englishness. But Kerr, polite yet firm, refused to betray her identity. She kept her voice polished, her posture upright, her elegance intact. She held on to the stillness that defined her. That same stillness would eventually become her trademark. From the disciplined dancer to the unexpected actress, from the shy understudy to the muse of a visionary director, Deborah Kerr entered Hollywood not as a comet, but as a steady flame, one that would burn with a quiet but unforgettable intensity. When Deborah Kerr arrived in Hollywood, she didn't do so with the flair of a rising star or the arrogance of someone who believed destiny owed her greatness. She arrived as she always had, discreetly, with a neatly packed suitcase and the same sense of discipline she had carried from her years in ballet training. But Hollywood, with all its glitter and brutality, wasted no time in revealing its rules. And the first rule was simple. To succeed in America, she would need to be less English. Studio executives urged her to soften her accent, loosen her posture, even adjust the way she laughed. Everything had to feel warmer, louder, more American. But Kerr, though endlessly polite, was never compliant. She refused to surrender her identity simply to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. That quiet resistance would follow her throughout her entire career. Still, the studios admired her. There was something in her presence that could not be manufactured. A natural elegance, an integrity, a strength that required no spectacle. So while they tried to reshape her, they also depended on her. They began offering her roles, but nearly all of them carried the same flavor. Aristocratic ladies, refined wives, women who suffered in silence. Beautiful roles, yes, but roles that imprisoned her inside a single image. Kerr found herself trapped in an invisible cage, not of iron, but of expectation. Yet she never stopped fighting for deeper characters. During rehearsals, she pushed for nuance. On set, she questioned choices that might oversimplify emotional truth. She wanted to explore darker corners, human contradictions, internal wars. But Hollywood, in its golden age, preferred easy glitter. And classy actresses weren't supposed to get their hands dirty. It was an unspoken rule. The paradox was that, even as the industry tried to limit her, her talent was too immense to ignore. Proof of this came in From Here to Eternity, 1953. There, she played Karen Holmes, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage who surrenders to a forbidden passion with Burt Lancaster's character. Kerr's emotional intensity shocked anyone who believed she could only portray immaculate ladies. It was her performance that electrified the famous beach kiss, waves crashing, sand clinging to their bodies, desire and desperation blending into one timeless image. In that moment, she did more than act. She transcended. That role forced Hollywood to see her differently. Suddenly, beneath the facade of perfection, they recognized an actress capable of devastating emotional force. And yet, even after that triumph, most of the roles she was offered were still variations of the same archetype. The industry was afraid to break its own myth. Deborah Kerr as the eternal embodiment of elegance. But Kerr refused to accept defeat. She set out to prove that sensitivity could also be a form of strength, that subtlety could speak louder than a shout, that a woman didn't need to abandon her dignity to portray extreme emotion. With every film, every measured gesture, every restrained glance, she carved small cracks into that invisible cage. Her conquest of Hollywood was not noisy, it was not explosive. It was a quiet, steady triumph, built on perseverance, discipline, and an integrity that no studio, no system, and no stereotype could ever break. When Deborah Kerr accepted the lead role in The King and I, 1956, she knew she was stepping into a world unlike anything she had done before. This was not a psychological drama, nor a restrained romance, nor a character she could sustain through subtle gestures alone. It was a musical, a grand, demanding, luminous production filled with challenges for an actress who did not sing professionally. The studio had no doubts they wanted Kerr as Anna Leonowens. Her elegance, her upright posture, that effortless blend of strength and tenderness made her the ideal choice. But there was one problem. Anna had to sing. And Deborah, perfectionist, disciplined, relentlessly self-critical, knew she could not reach the vocal level the role demanded. That was when the solution appeared. Marni Nixon, Hollywood's legendary ghost voice, would sing all of Anna's songs while Kerr synchronized her lips on screen. For many actors, being dubbed might have felt humiliating, but Deborah treated it as another professional challenge. She spent weeks studying every breath, every vibration, every pause in Nixon's recordings. She didn't want to seem dubbed. She wanted their combined effort to feel like a single, seamless performance. The result was so flawless that even today, many viewers still believe Kerr sang the songs herself. But while the singing was a technical trial, working with Yul Brynner was an emotional one. He was a storm, charismatic, dominating, unpredictable, a man who commanded any space he entered. She was the opposite. Calm, measured, composed. Two opposing forces that, in theory, should have collided. Yet something extraordinary happened. Their chemistry ignited the screen. Their contrasting energies created precisely the electrifying tension the story needed. Still, it was far from an easy partnership. Brynner was known for his intensity and tendency to control every detail. At times he pushed, insisted, or challenged Kerr in unexpected ways. But she, with her unbreakable serenity, never allowed herself to be intimidated. She held her ground, responded with professionalism, and never lost her composure. That silent resilience eventually earned Brynner's deep respect. Years later, he admitted that Deborah Kerr had been the perfect Anna, strong without aggression, gentle without submission, dignified in every gesture. The success of The King and I was monumental. The film became an instant classic, and the image of Kerr spinning through the Siamese palace in enormous sweeping gowns remains one of the most iconic visuals of Hollywood's golden age. But triumph often comes with a hidden cost. For Deborah, the role reinforced the very label she had spent years trying to escape. The perfect lady, the immaculate woman, the actress who embodied moral refinement and unshakable grace. Because although Anna was a beautifully written character full of warmth and humanity, the role solidified the mold Hollywood had imposed on her. A mold Kerr increasingly felt was suffocating her. She knew she could portray darker, more contradictory, more dangerous characters. She had already proven it in Black Narcissus and From Here to Eternity. Yet the industry continued choosing to see only one version of her. The King and I brought her fame, prestige, and yet another Oscar nomination. But it also left her with an ambiguous ache, the joy of success intertwined with the weight of a role that unintentionally reinforced the same barriers she longed to break. Even so, Deborah Kerr transformed that challenge into a masterpiece. What could have been a limited, decorative role became, through her emotional intelligence, one of the most unforgettable portrayals of a female character in classic cinema. Throughout Hollywood's golden decades, few stories are as paradoxical or as quietly heartbreaking as Deborah Kerr's relationship with the Academy. Between 1949 and 1960, her name appeared 6 times on the nominations list for Best Actress. 6, a number that should have cemented her greatness, yet instead became a cruel reminder of what she never received. Each nomination acknowledged her immense talent, yet each loss reopened a wound, a promise left unfulfilled. In an industry overflowing with spectacles, scandals, and dramatic outbursts, the most disciplined and elegant actress of classic cinema never once heard her name called on Hollywood's most prestigious stage. Her nominations spanned some of her most intense roles: the anguished mother in Edward, My Son, the torn, resilient nun in Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, the woman trapped between duty and desire in From Here to Eternity, the haunted governess in The Innocents. These were performances that demanded profound emotional investment, often more complex than those that actually won in those same years. But fate, or perhaps Hollywood's unwritten rules, seemed to decide that Kerr would forever remain the great nominee. Part of the explanation lay in how the industry perceived her. Despite her efforts, despite her moments of pure, explosive emotional brilliance, the myth of the perfect lady followed her everywhere. To many Academy voters, Deborah represented British elegance incarnate: refined, controlled, immaculate. That ideal made her admired, but also underestimated. It was as though her subtlety, so difficult to measure, so nuanced, was less visible than the fiery, dramatic performances of others. In Hollywood, perfection is not always rewarded. Sometimes it becomes its own punishment. Perfection carried a cost in her personal life as well. Her first marriage to former RAF pilot Anthony Bartley crumbled under the weight of constant distance, endless work commitments, and the relentless pressure of a career that moved forward without pause. Though both tried to salvage the relationship, the emotional distance eventually grew too wide. The press, true to form, invented motives, exaggerated tensions, and whispered conflicts that never existed. Kerr, as always, stayed silent. She never gossiped, never defended herself, never corrected rumors. Her dignity was its own fortress. But life granted her a second chance. With writer and screenwriter Peter Vertel, a free-spirited, unconventional soul, she found the balance she had long sought. Together, they built a partnership grounded in trust, complicity, and quiet affection. Vertel saw in Deborah not the flawless Hollywood icon, but the curious, sensitive, deeply intelligent woman behind the camera. It was a mature, steady love that accompanied her for more than 40 years. By the late 1960s, Deborah began to feel that Hollywood was no longer her home. The industry was shifting. New generations ushered in a different energy, and the era of classic ladies was fading. Instead of clinging to a place that no longer felt like hers, she made a bold, graceful decision. She left Hollywood and returned to the stage, first in London, then on Broadway. There, away from the relentless scrutiny of film studios, she rediscovered the purest form of acting. Theater returned to her what the screen had often denied: freedom. And although the Oscar never came through traditional means, the Academy eventually had to surrender to the truth. Deborah Kerr's greatness was impossible to ignore. But that moment of recognition would arrive later, in the final chapter of her life, when the world finally learned how to look beyond the perfection. When Deborah Kerr finally chose to step away from Hollywood, she didn't do it because of scandal, or lack of roles, or fading relevance. She did it for a far more human reason. She was tired. For decades, she had upheld an impeccable career, carried an untouchable public image, and maintained a discipline that bordered on the inhuman. She had lived for her work, for the studios, for directors, for the stories of others. But now she wanted to live for herself. She wanted silence. She wanted to breathe without being watched. She wanted to exist without having to perform. Alongside Peter Viertel, her life partner, she chose a place far from noise and expectations, Marbella on the southern coast of Spain. There, she found what Hollywood had never offered her, anonymity and peace. She took slow walks, read for hours, enjoyed the Mediterranean air, chatted with close friends, and allowed herself to disappear from public view. To many, it seemed as if Deborah Kerr had vanished overnight. To her, it was simply a quiet rebirth. But in that sunlit, silent corner of the world, the most difficult chapter of her life began. Parkinson's disease, slow, treacherous, and relentless, began to take hold of her body. At first, the symptoms were barely noticeable, tiny tremors, subtle hints. Then came the harsher limitations, rigidity, loss of balance, the gradual disappearance of autonomy. For a woman who had built her entire career on absolute control of her body, first as a dancer, then as an actress, it was a devastating cruelty. Kerr faced the illness with the same dignity with which she had navigated Hollywood. She didn't complain. She didn't seek pity. She did not want cameras or headlines. She maintained her discretion until the very end. Even her admirers remained unaware for years of what she was enduring. It was as if Deborah wanted to protect the world from her fragility, in the same way she had always guarded her private life. And yet, the world had not forgotten her. In 1994, the Academy chose to correct a long-standing injustice, awarding her the honorary Oscar for her lifetime achievements. It was a profoundly symbolic moment. The industry that had never given her the award during her 6 nominations was finally acknowledging her undeniable greatness. Though weakened and far from the spotlight, Kerr received the honor with the same quiet composure that defined her. For many, it was an act of overdue justice. For others, a reminder of how often Hollywood takes too long to appreciate subtlety. That same year, she also received tributes in her homeland. Decades earlier, she had been appointed an Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, by Queen Elizabeth II, an honor she carried with serene pride. In England, Deborah Kerr was not just an actress. She was a symbol of elegance, discipline, and an artistic tradition that was disappearing. With time, her figure became almost mythical. To younger generations, Deborah Kerr was not the actress who lost Oscars. She was the eternal image of British grace, a woman who could evoke inner storms with a single glance. Her nickname, the English Rose of Hollywood, became an inseparable part of her legacy. A rose that never needed thorns, yet still survived every tempest. Deborah Kerr passed away in 2007 in the same Marbella where she had found refuge. She died as she lived, quietly, surrounded by affection, far from the glare of the spotlight. But her presence lingers in every viewer who has ever watched her films and felt, even for a moment, that unique blend of fragility and strength. Because some stars do not shine by shouting. They shine in silence. And it is that silence, her silence, that made her eternal. As the world began to change, and Hollywood left behind the golden elegance of its classical era, Olivia de Havilland remained a living bridge between 2 centuries, 2 ways of life, and 2 distinct understandings of art. Her existence, long, intense, and quietly revolutionary, became a testament to how one woman can transform an entire system without ever raising her voice, simply by holding her dignity as a banner. Over more than 100 years, Olivia witnessed wars, shifting fashions, the rise and fall of cinematic empires, and generations of actors who regarded her as something almost mythical, someone whose legacy rose far above awards or filmographies. From her apartments in Paris, surrounded by letters, memories, and the soft light of the city, Olivia lived a peaceful life that contrasted sharply with the whirlwind of her Hollywood youth. There, she wrote, answered admirers with her familiar courtesy, and walked the Parisian streets like a lady who understood the true value of time. It was in that same city that she received, at the age of 101, the title of Dame of the British Empire in 2017, an honor that seemed to close a circle of elegance that had followed her since childhood. When she passed away in 2020, at 104 years old, the world did not simply lose an extraordinary actress, it lost the final direct voice of Hollywood's golden age. Yet her legacy lives on in every performer who fights for complex roles, in every artist who demands contractual freedom, in every woman who refuses to be boxed into someone else's idea of who she should be. Olivia never set out to be a heroine, and yet she became one. Her story, woven between light and silence, remains a reminder that true strength does not always roar. Sometimes it simply endures, steadfast, quiet, and transformative.